Chapter 7, 12th day of April, 1679. I hitched up my dress and petticoat, retrieved the note from my knickers, and handed it to Lady Paris. Far from being shocked by this uncouth display, she held out her hand solemnly. "You say this is a petition from the prison. How came you by it?" she asked warily rather than curiously. Her suspicion was warranted. Gentlewomen, such as myself, did not normally frequent such places. Indeed, the place would have remained foreign to me had I not had reason to attend a woman I delivered there a year or more previously. Now I was the most regular visitor to His Majesty's compulsory dwelling, discovering and recording all the wrongs I could of the place. "I had it from a man called Willoughby in the debtors' prison. He had heard of you through a priest that is in Newgate, that you and our mutual friend, your cousin Roger Palmer, the Earl of Castlemaine, are of a generous character, and he bid me give you this, though it put me in danger to do so." "You say his name is Willoughby?" "Thomas Willoughby, your ladyship." "Is he of Percival Willoughby's blood?" "The physician. I know of him and his newfangled ideas he foists on midwives. I have great respect for him. But the writer of this letter is not of that family, ma'am. I asked him." "What is his purpose in writing?" "I think you will find the purpose inside." A witless question. She had the letter in her hand, and could so quickly find his purpose, but she continued to look to me for an answer, and since I knew one, I told it to her. "I believe he asked for your pity, your mercy, and some relief from his position. I believe he tells you he is wrongly accused." "Is he an honest man?" "I believe so, your ladyship." That seemed to satisfy her. She nodded. "Then I will read it." Lady Paris took the letter to her desk by the window and sat on the seat with her back to me. I looked around the reception room. It was far bigger than my own, and the trimmings were much more luxurious, many more gilded threads in the tapestry cushions and curtains, and gold leaf highlighting the plasterwork relief. The chandeliers were clean with no spider webs of dust, and the knick-knacks on the mantel shone with care. That she had many servants was obvious. No single person could keep the place in such good care. Our own 4 servants, while considered a respectable number by most, presented as paltry in comparison to that of the Paris household. From her seat, having finished reading, she asked, "Can I trust you?" "If I were to declare myself honourable," I replied, "you will be none the wiser, ma'am." She looked surprised by my intelligent answer. "You are right. It was a nonsense question." She looked out the window while saying this, her eyes distant, but on finishing turned back to me. Her eyes searched my very soul for the answer to her question. She seemed to like what she saw and smiled. "You will do. You say you are a midwife. Will you take a reply?" I ignored the first question. It seemed it was rhetorical, and answered the second. "If you wish me to." "This must go to the man, Thomas Willoughby, and none other, you understand?" By that, I knew she meant not the keepers, and understood why a short while later, when she added a few coins in the note and sealed it. She added, "Since Willoughby trusts you, then I find no reason not to. A man's trust these days is hard to earn, so you must have given him reason. Take this to him, keep it under your skirt." Her meaning was clear, both physically and metaphorically. "Yes, your ladyship. And here's something for your trouble." She put a coin in my hand with the letter, but I refused it. "I have money enough, your ladyship. I have no need of yours." "Well then, give it to some deserving soul in the prison. It is my understanding charges are dear in there, for even removing irons from the relief of the ankles and wrists." "Even for putting the irons on, my lady." "Huh? How preposterous! Why would a person pay to have irons put on?" "It is a simple choice. pay a fee to wear the irons offered, or wear some that are so great they weigh down the feet until a man cannot walk. The keepers can charge all they wish for doing as they want, whether it is to the prisoner's advantage or against it. They take money for victuals and drink, and for a pot to sit on, and for emptying it. If a man has no coin for a bed, they will take it away. You can get the driest, warmest cell if you have coins enough. The rich may pay to bend treatment in their favour, but for that, their veins of inheritances are bled dry. The poor are simply punished for having no means to line the pocket of the jailer. Once in the flow of this, I could not stop myself from expounding on the appalling conditions in the prison, and how prisoners were charged for every smallest right a person should have naturally, and how that rubbed biting salt into their wound of unfair imprisonment without any healing. Lady Paris walked back to the seat by the desk at the window and sat stiff and upright, staring sightlessly at the spring downpour. If she had a conscience, she would take a moment to digest this information, for we all like to believe such things remained in lands far away and had long been eliminated from my own country. Most of the gentle classes had no reason to visit the prison, and if they did, they were shown nice cells where the well-to-do kith or kin could afford to be. Rarely did they see where the most of the condemned were holed. They would not bear it for the overwhelming stench, and smelling that stench they would likely think some animal is kept there, as I did before I went inside. The first time I had entered the prison, I was called to attend a woman, Mrs. Whitley, who, with the insistent hunger of carrying a child, had been caught stealing a single apple from a cart loaded with ripe fruit, and for that she was thrown in a cell until a judge would see her. But not knowing his whereabouts, the infant did not wait until he might present himself in more appropriate surroundings. I heard Mrs. Whitley's labour cries long before I reached her, but they were combined with the groans and moans and yells and sobbing from other cells along the way. The stink affected me greatly. I retched, though I covered my nose and mouth with a handkerchief, but the noise of neglect was loud and turned my stomach. A dirty, ill-fed man, supporting himself by the iron bars, held out his hand for money or for food. When I went for my purse, the guard ushered me on past him with the warning, "Do not, madam, you will not reach your target." I was conscious of my good clothes and expected such niceties to rile the prisoners, because I had what they had not. But their needs were so great they only wanted food and basic care, and had no care for me. Many lay down in their own filth on the floor, no longer having the instinct to move out of it. That was likely the cause of death of more men and women in there than from starvation. As we walked, I asked the keeper why these men were in such conditions. "They have no money," he said. "Surely bread and water are a right?" I asked. "They cannot get these for themselves." "If they cannot pay, we ain't got bread to feed 'em. They have to pay for the stuff themselves. We ain't a charity, my lady. They did something wrong, and that's why they're here. They should have done nothing wrong if they cannot pay." In fact, their greatest malfaction was their birth into poverty. No matter what their crime, the affliction of these poor men affected me so greatly that I was compelled to return the following day with loaves of money. As I entered the gate, the keeper checked my basket for weapons or notes, and finding none, waved me through with indifference. If he was surprised by my visit, he did not show it. He truly did not care if they did not eat. Neither did he care if they did. He simply did not care about their well-being at all, his only task to keep them there. Any other satisfaction he had was to torment them and see them suffer. That first time I broke pieces from the loaves and fed them to as many as I could. They were so grateful I nearly cried when they scrabbled for the crumbs like animals. I had too little for all of them, so I returned later with more. The ones who ate before begged me as earnestly as those who had none, so it was difficult to tell which ones to give to. There were some that had given up hope of victuals and lay on the floor waiting to die, who did not try to take any bread from me. I could not reach them for the bars, so I found a jailer seated in the sunshine on an upturned ale keg, and asked him if I might be let inside the cells. I could not persuade him to take leave of the sunshine and enter the dingy den of the inmates with words and pleas. "For twopence, I'll let you look. For a groat, I'll let you in," he said. This was a common scheme, I fast found, for turnkeys to make more than the king paid them. I gave him silver enough to enter the cells, and he tested it with his teeth, jangled the keys importantly, and then let me enter. That was the last time I paid for entry. After that time, I obtained official papers to give relief to the prisoners whensoever I desired it. The prisoners on the floor would not take victuals at first, not because they refused, but they appeared to have forgotten how. Once I put a small pea-sized piece of bread in their mouths, the reflex to chew slowly returned. I had also brought with me a flagon of water and spooned some over their tongues to wash it down. There was one that was beyond help that did not chew, even with a morsel of bread placed in his mouth. He did not swallow water either. Though he had no illness that other prisoners could catch, they stayed at the far side of the cell away from him. To them he was death. He was what they would become if they did not eat and drink. He was as a ghost in their eyes. If they looked at him at all, his presence was a painful reminder that they had nothing to feed themselves, and that they could not afford this fellow inmate's pity nor kindness. Whether he had family and what he was in life outside, nobody knew or cared. He was simply a dead man. After that day, I returned regularly to Newgate, bringing food, water, and occasionally money to buy better outlook for a person. The dead man, the ghost, I paid to be moved to a better cell with a bed, and then visited him daily. It was so little, but if he must die in that hole, he should die with some respect, not as an animal. My money was little used. It was but a short time before his body was carried away on a cart to God only knows where they took him. I did not ask, and I never knew his name, though I did ask. That man's soul now belonged to God, or the other one, depending on what the man had done. It was better that I did something for the living. The prisoners and the keeper became used to my visits, and soon I was greeted by name. "Good morning, Mother Cellier. Sun's been shining hard today. We will let them in the yard later. Let them have some air," said the turnkey, already fumbling the hook of keys from the belt and finding the one to let me in. It was joy to me that he should say so I commented as I walked through the door to the damp, dark air inside. "That would be a fine thing to do, Mr. Harris." I was not in the habit of talking to the man that I now knew went by the name of Harris. He was thoughtless and uncharitable when I first visited, and I believed he was still, so I pondered on this as I walked along the passage to the cells. But perhaps I had influence over this coarse man as well as the prisoners. "Mrs. Cellier, I beg your assistance. Johnny has passed out. Have you some water?" This from a man who had been more concerned for his own health than any other when I first came by here, confirming the idea my visits had swayed hearts as well as bellies. The thought that I had brought a little humanity to the prison, where I had previously seen none, pleased me. I had found a use for myself. My charity might not change the way of it all, but it might alter the lives of some few men and women in my life, and that must satisfy me. Lady Paris had not seen what I had seen. I did not know if I should say more, but contrary to my usual demeanour, I decided against it. I took the woman's silence to hitch up my skirt once more and hid the fairly heavy note in the specially made pocket in my knickers. It should be safe there. Few would disturb the modesty of a gentlewoman. The lady stood and went over to an ornately carved wooden box on the mantel. From it she took several silver coins and laid them in my palm. "Give these to some people who need it." I looked in my hand and saw 2 half-crowns and 3 sixpence pieces, and thought of the bread that might give the good persons inside. It was an unexpected kindness. "Thank you, your ladyship. I will do it in your name." With that, I was shown to the door. "Will you come back and tell me what difference it makes?" she asked suddenly. I nodded and smiled. I had not expected the goodness of this woman. "Yes, I will do that." As I walked down the road with a mission in my knickers, I picked up the hood of my cloak to keep the cloudburst of rainfall from my head. This was an interesting day. Apart from the intrigue of carrying notes between the prison and this lady, I had the feeling that this woman and I might become known to each other, and that could not be but a happy circumstance. Chapter 8. 13th day of April, 1679. I contrived to see Willoughby the very next day. It was not Harris at the gate on arrival. It was a young man barely out of the schoolroom breeches, though I had doubts he ever had any schooling. He had the hard-eyed, soulless face that took many years to ripen, and a nose that was so bulbous it brought to mind an onion. He was a sassy brat, not much older than my middle children, but he was the brat holding the key to the lives of all the men and women inside. "You leave that bread here, missus, and I'll be sure they get it later, if you know what I mean." "Pray, do tell your meaning," I said conversationally, sure his intention was to have the bread and pass on some diverse joy as the irons, a drubbing, or other torment. The boy had the beat 'em or be beaten appearance of the poor, whose family had so little that the parents would often be without, so the children might have some supper, and then brother might fight brother over the mouthful that the strongest or cleverest would grow stronger. Mostly those pickings were made into broth to feed both parents and children, but the nourishment was so thin, so much it was made little difference to the ache in the bellies of any. The boy was the survivor. He had come this far by beating the fight out of his siblings and winning that last piece of bread or cabbage stalk or whatever was brought home that day. What I mean is what I say. I'll take that basket of bread to the prisoners. You go home and I'll make sure that they get it. In the year that I have come here, I have met most keepers. You are new here, boy. I'm sure you are keen to keep your job. Just you let me pass without any lip, and I will tell Richardson your service to me was favourable. Don't, and well, just see what he will do if you do not. There was not one man in the infested place that did not fear the ire of Newgate's keeper, a giant sadistic man more likely to break bread with the devil than with men. It was not only the prisoners that feared him, but the guards as well. Whispers of his dark deeds were not hard to hear. They filled every corner of the place. Most prisoners would tattle for a morsel. Fresh water would have the whole story. Every man knew him for a cutthroat scoundrel that ran a bed of thieves. Not one that I ever spoke to had seen him smile, not even with satisfaction. "Have to see your papers?" I showed them. His puny body told me it was rather his head than his muscle that aided his survival, so he was as fast as I suspected he would be to realise the sheriff held the purse to his job, and he quickly moved to open the door with a familiar jangle of keys. I also completely expected his face-saving words as I passed through the door. "Ain't you got a piece of meat for me, missus?" "You know, boy," I said, looking skyward while I remembered, "I do believe I remember birthing you. You're one of the Bowden boys from Cheapside, are you not?" I knew I had found my mark when his eyes widened with surprise. He had the distinctive Bowden nose and big ears, both on a scrawny little face. He stared at me open-mouthed, as if I had used supernatural powers, and with that satisfaction I continued walking. There was nothing like a little midwife magic to smooth the passage to many a place most ordinary folk would not venture. Do Do carry your kind regards to your good mother, I said without looking back. I would be sure to keep a small bite of bread for the lad on the way out. If I gave it going in, he would think it payment and ask it every time. This way, it would be a gift if I chose to give, not depending on how much benefit he was to me. To give or not, depending on how much benefit he was to me. I once walked through the corridors with a handkerchief soaked in lavender oil over my nose, else the contents of my stomach would have been expelled. I soon found this distinguished me as an outsider more so than my clean clothes, and compelled myself to breathe the air unfettered. The stink of gangrene, of unhealed limbs, was dire, and sometimes bodies of the executed were kept in a cell and left there so long the stench of them rotting was more than a prisoner living there could bear. I remembered how when I first went to that place, not one man had a to share a cell with a quartered body writhing in maggots, and so putrid he had held a latrine bowl to his nose as relief from the smell. I had a lot to say to Richardson about that. He did not listen at first, but when I did not stop, he found it more comfortable to his ears to move the carcass. They moved the body parts to the yard near the strong room, and have kept all bodies there since. It disgusted me to see the lives of the poor finished on such a heap, yet it was better that they no longer kept company with the inmates. But it was hunger that was of the continual importance. I could never provide enough for the prisoners. They were always starving, no matter how much I brought with me. Even while all the coins I could spare, it was never enough. I did what I could, finding other good souls to help me, but still it was not enough. So many mouths made quick work of the many baskets of bread we could bring in a day. I distributed loaves to prisoners, giving each a larger chunk than normal. With the money from Lady Paris burning a hole in my pocket, I intended buying more that very afternoon. It was but a meagre portion, but 2 scraps of bread in a single day was a feast to these folks, a kindness that should have been theirs by right. I gave them nearly everything I had, allowing, as was my wont, enough for poor families of those who dwelled there that were not provided for. The prisoners had themselves asked me to do this. Not long after my first visit, prisoners started begging me to look after their wives, husbands, children, as well, many of whom were only better off for having not being locked in behind bars, their hunger nearly as great as those in the cells. Their numbers were so many, too many, I could do but little. I did what I could. Perhaps Lord Castlemaine might find me more alms for them. He was a generous man, and he'd given often, or perhaps I could find another person with money enough to spare for these unfortunates. Lady Paris had given willingly when she had heard of their plight. I would ask her tomorrow. Captain Willoughby was not in the crowded debtor's cell when I met him last. A man with no front teeth and eyes so sunken they disappeared in his skull told me Willoughby had spoken out of turn to a keeper. If there was one thing I had fast learned, a person inside there should not talk back to a turnkey. Punishment was often swift. The keys hanging from their belts gave them license to retaliate with far worse punishment than the perceived crime, and most would as readily strike a man with an iron or 9 tails as deprive him of the sun or food, or first fasten them to the wall or roofs with the chains. I retraced my steps to the gates and the Bowden boy. I asked him where the captain had been taken. "Give us a bit of that loaf and I'll tell you." "Tell me, and you will have some," I said, easily recovering power over him. I had the measure of him. He paused but a moment before answering. "They put him in the strong room on his own for a bit of quiet, out of the goodness of their hearts," he said. Jailers never did anything for the prisoners' benefit, only for their own. But I did not argue with the boy and give him reason to deny me. That Willoughby was now in a cell away from the crowded debtor's cell, might at first seem like a good thing, but it was not. My stomach lurched as I remembered 2 months back finding a man alone in the strong room with his face eaten by rats. Prisoners told me he was only lately gone from the commoner's cell and must have died mere hours before. The strong room was a foul place to put a man on his own, and one of the worst punishments. "Show me," I said with the authority I could muster. My 50 years easily overwhelmed his 15, and mere tone of voice had him lead me where Willoughby crouched in the dark room, with his arms wrapped around his raised knees and his forehead leaning on the top of them. His back was pressed to the wall, a wise position I knew afforded him one less direction to protect himself from the rats. If the stench of the commoner's cell made me retch, here was the worst smell I could ever imagine, and would never have wished to imagine. The strong room lay close to the pile of rotting bodies in sight of the door, awaiting burial. I averted my watering eyes from those persons that once filled the jail, but were now tiresome waste to be disposed of before disease and maggots found their way inside from the yard. How a person might bear that being that close to death and disease without losing their mind, I did not know, but I saw the man before me could easily fall into that despair, if he had not already done so. His demeanour was much darkened since last I saw him. At that time his jaunty "Release me, madam, and you will gain yourself a servant of superior quality for a year, and an ardent admirer for all eternity," implied that, though his body was caged, his spirit was free. But now his hunchback and dropped head was more than a physical position. It was a statement of his place in the prison and in life. It was most unpleasant to see any man so consumed by despair and so lacking in vitality. He raised his head as our footsteps approached and greeted me. "You came back. I knew you would." His voice told me he had known no such thing, nor had he ever believed it. He searched my face to see if I had brought news for his hoped-for benefactor. I could not pass Willoughby the message from Lady Paris, with the young turnkey standing beside me, so, searching in my basket, I found some victuals to send him away with. "Here, young Bowden, I have some bread for you and a carrot from my garden. Maybe you prefer to eat them away from here." I looked pointedly at the young gaoler. It was a stroke of luck recognise him, and at the rotting cadavers. He took the food and the hint and nodded, then left us. I did not think I could have eaten so much I did not think I could have eaten so close to such feta, but a person could become used to it with time and hunger, and Bowden proved this by eating some of the loaf as he left us. The way he hunched over it confirmed my earlier image of him fighting for his food and probably keeping his back to the others so they could not snatch it. Though he was only a young un, he had the power to make life very difficult for those inside, and could almost make things difficult for me. But with care and time, he might as easily be taught the simple necessity of treating a person with dignity, to the satisfaction of us all. "Quick, does she send me a message?" Willoughby's eyes were crazed with a mixture of hope and despair. He begged my answer before I was ready to give it. He pushed himself to stand and wobbled to the bars that stood between us, kicking a dead rat into the corner. I saw 2 live ones scurry to where they had been sitting and search the area with their noses. The fire had burned most from the city, but numbers had increased again since then. These odious vermin had no shame, showing themselves while we stood right there. However, I did not cringe. I was used to seeing the creatures in the cells. "Eat first," I said, fearing Bowden might still be close by. Neither did I wish for him to see where I hid the letter. Trying not to retch at the smears of filth on the hand that took it, I gave him a chunk of bread, which he ate voraciously. Under the dirt on his hand, I saw what looked like letters N and G that I did not have time to wonder at. "Turn your back," I said. His puzzled look gave way to understanding. He remembered I had asked him to turn his back when I hid his note to Lady Paris. Willoughby took the opportunity to stuff the remaining bread in his mouth, more in the manner of a beast than refined rearing would dignify. I quickly retrieved the heavy coin-filled note and said, "This is for you," then watched as an eager Willoughby took it, felt the weight of it, then opened it as if it might contain summons to the court, without knowing whether it would be as a paid witness or the condemned. He looked up with such hope that would make a cloud smile. Tears pooled in the bottom of his sharp, shapely eyes, and when he blinked, stuck to his eyelashes and made them pretty like a woman's, strangely more masculine on a man. And despite loving Pierre with all my being, an unexpected rush of adult affection shot through me and brought me closer to the young handsome fellow. "Thank you, madam, thank you. You are kindness itself." "Am I kind that I am merely the bearer of good news?" My smile was a match for his. "Aye, you are indeed," he said. "The good Lady Paris has given me enough to get out of this damnable place and to a better hole at the King's Bench. She has also declared herself to have sympathy for me. That is indeed good news. Shall I call the turnkey back?" "He has no authority. He can do nothing. A man will return at sundown, and I will charge him to release me from here then." Willoughby paused only a heartbeat, and then said, "I owe you a great debt, madam, a debt I shall repay you before the end of my days, as surely as I stand here now. That you can leave this dreadful place will be thanks enough," I told him. "You also do me a good turn when you collect stories of bad treatment here. How goes that?" Clasping the red letter in one hand and coins in the other, he still managed to hold the iron bars and press his face into the gap. Checking the door, he lowered his voice. "I have started the article as you asked." Satisfied, I privately extended gratitude for the written evidence to my friend, Mrs. White, that had told me the good fortune in acquainting herself with Willoughby whilst in prison. She had told me that he had sworn vengeance on Captain Richardson for his excessive severity, and she had been right. "I will put the accounts of torture and ill use in this prison before the government and the king, so they can know the devil does not choose instruments of his work from only men far away, but also from amongst our own." I paused to reflect on how God and the devil were equal in not favouring countries, nor even religions, only the instruments they would use to each to their own end. "Perhaps I can repay your kindness sooner. Are you able to keep a secret?" "It might depend on what importance it has. I will not promise to conceal something if I do not know the content of it." "'Tis of the greatest importance, and to do with the king." My ears pricked up like a dog's on the scent of such mystery. "What do you know of the king? Is he in danger?" "'Tis a plot, madam, of the direst sort." "Have you proof of it?" I asked. Many bragged they had information since the king had declared he would pay for it, and if all versions were true, as many plots prevailed, as there were persons in the country. "Aye, I have. There's a man I know at the King's Bench that has evidence," he said. "And you know who is involved against the king?" "I do, madam. Do you swear to hold my secret close?" "My lips will not release it unless it is to save the king." "These words I tell you hold great weight," he reiterated, so quiet that I needed to hold my head closer to the bars and tape down my hood that its rustle against my hair did not prevent my hearing his whisper. "If the words found their way into the ears of the plotters, they may act prematurely, and none would be able to stop them." "'Tis understood," I nodded. "Good. You are the one called the Popish Midwife, who they speak well of in here, which satisfies me that you will keep good your oath, for this plot is made by some that have positions close to the king, and who are trusted by him. Tell me who they are. I could stand it no longer. If the king was in danger, I must discover all I could and prevent it. Patience, madam. I must tell you, and when I give you these names, you must not run to the king or his men with this story. There is no proof but what I overheard in the prison here, and that from a man named Strode, who is now too clammed up to let loose this information again. He only revealed what he had when he was woozy with liquor. He spoke in his cups. Perhaps his words cannot be trusted. Aye, but true or not, I must reveal to you what I know. The men I tell you of huddled together to hatch a most horrendous plot. Their plan was to kill the king by several means, but to make it appear to come from the Romish side, the Catholic side. The Popish plot is nothing but hatched from their imaginations. 'Tis the Presbyterians who should rightly own it. I am further told Sir Godfrey's death has been turned on by the priests, and my Lord Bellasis, that is in the Tower by Oates, for the magistrate knew Oates lied in the affidavit he made to him of the plot. What? Treachery! And it was their plan to lay it on us? With what method did the plan to carry out this dastardly act? Poison, perhaps, or maybe the sword. The man did not say. But you are certain it was not of a creation born of too much ale? The details are not certain. The plan is too early, I think, for the details to be known. All I am sure of is they used the accusations of that false man, Oates, to direct the finger of the law at the Catholics and away from them. So you know no details of the carrying out of the plot? Was I disappointed? But yes, I would as lief be the discoverer of it, and to bear this news to the King Charles and his brother James, the Duke of York. I would have proof that I, as a Catholic, not only would not kill the king, as many would believe, but would defend him with my life and save him if I could. Furthermore, I yearned to be accepted back into the royal court. When last I was summoned to the court a fortnight ago by the Duchess of York, it was merely to satisfy which of two recipes she should best use to strengthen the womb against the unbearable burden of miscarriage, a potion of cinnamon, nutmeg, sugar and eggs, as she had heard from her mother, or a powder of dragon's blood, red coral, ambergris, and bezoar in burnt claret wine, a recipe told to her by Mrs. Wilkes, her midwife. Wishing no disagreement with either woman, I told her both were perfectly acceptable, and that, if it so pleased her, she could occasionally lay on her navel a bread poultice of chamomile flowers, mastic, and cloves, bruised and mingled well with some Maligo wine and rose vinegar. My own recipe and advice was received with gratitude, but as yet no further invitations were issued from the palace. Willoughby's information would place me in a position of goodwill and trust, and I might be welcomed as I once was when I waited on the first Duchess of York. To be so vindicated would be the greatest boon. Not the details, but the men involved for certain. You had better be sure of your facts. I am sure as I stand here, I tell you. Well then, tell me. One you will be surprised to hear. That is Lord Shaftesbury. Shaftesbury? No, this I will not hear. He is right there with the king. His face fell, for he thought I did not believe him. I did not doubt him, the man, only the truth of what he said. He is the head of them. He is the one that gathered them there together. If you say so, then. But he is a knight. It is hard to think of a more honest or decent profession. Does that not make it of more concern, not less? I thought about this and realised he was right. One that appeared honest might be given more power than one that is not trusted, allowed into position where he could hurt a person because they did not believe he would. Shaftesbury was such a man. His closeness to the king disguised the harm he wished him. A coldness ran through me. "Have you other names?" He mumbled. "A few," said Willoughby, "but I did not know them. If I ask him now, he would suspect me of angling for them." "Can you insinuate yourself into closer acquaintance with him and discover the truth of the matter, Captain?" Willoughby thought for a while and then said, "Drink loosed his tongue once, so it might do so again. When I go to the bench, will you find me a bottle of something strong that I might tempt him and unfasten his tongue? We must do all we can to discover this plot and expose it. I will bring what I can. Perhaps my son-in-law, can make me something. He is an apothecary by trade. Will you become familiar to this man and be his companion? He might be willing to talk without inducement. I have tried that. His lips were locked tight as the girdle of Venus without a key." I laughed at his crude wit, surprised I could find humour in this terrible place. Willoughby's eyes creased at the corners, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of his teeth, yellowing, but even and whole, though needing a good clean. What came forth was a cough, more of a cough than a laugh. This man was an open speaker and did not hide behind the pretended morals of the gentry, even coming from the same. I liked one who spoke freely of the world as they saw it, and with good humour. Another rat ran close to Willoughby's feet, and the stench of death reminded me where I was, so I stopped laughing. Willoughby also stopped, and his face became desperate once more. These surroundings could not but weigh heavily on him. After all, he was a debtor, not a criminal, and even one that deserved greater punishment did not deserve such foulness. The strong room was designed to keep a man solitary. Though I had come here ere now, I was not certain I would be let back. I was only allowed this visit because the Bowden boy was a greenhorn and knew no better. Veteran jailers might not let me come. "Willoughby, it is of vital importance we discover this plot as fast as we can. We must let the king know of it. I will talk to the turnkeys and see what we might do to get you moved from here. You have payment enough, but it will take time to move you to the king's bench if they will let you go." "You are too good, madam. Your kindness is a tonic to restore me." Then, before I could step back out of reach, the rascal took hold of my hand in his mucky fingers and raised it to his lips. Repulsed by the touch of one so dirty, I nearly snatched it back. Yet a bolder part of me, the one that fluttered with the adult affection when he had shed a tear before, would have liked him to hold the cherished hand longer. The jaundiced whites of his eyes, bright against the dirty skin, could not diminish the sapphires that peered directly at me through long lashes as he raised his lips from my hand. Even then I did not withdraw my hand, but waited for him to give it. "I am ever your servant, madam. If ever it is in my power to be assistance to you for all you have done for me, then I will use it." "Thank you, Willoughby. In my turn, I will do all I can for you." "Your kindness will not be forgotten, madam." For a moment before I remembered myself, I was beguiled into thinking myself a lady romanced in court, but it lasted only a moment. The Bowden boy came and told me I had to go. I became a common almoner in a stinking prison once more. "The Bowden boy," said Richardson, the head jailer, "was on his way, and I must not still be in the strong room when he got there. The lad did not wish to heap trouble on his shoulders if I was found there. It was forbidden for me to have such a run of the place. I surmised that, if he was found to do wrong, he would likely receive some of the same treatment as the prisoners, Any not as rough and cocky as the other turnkeys was fair game to be slashed by their spurs. He might as well be beaten as lose his job. I did not wish the boy harm for his sympathy to my cause, so I bid Willoughby farewell and promised to find him again soon. I left him with another chunk of bread, which he ate ravenously as if he had had none before. I had not thought to bring ale to wash it down, but would bring some next time. I gave one last piece to the Bowden boy for going out the gate. It was gratefully received. I had much work to do.